Morning. Always enjoy having this opportunity to stand before you to share the gospel message. I always felt that the best thing that I can do, be found doing, when the Lord comes back, is to be sharing his message with someone else. So I am very thankful for this opportunity. Over the last several months, we have been studying together the fruit of the Spirit and how it is supposed to be manifested in our lives. We've been using the Galatians in chapter 5, of course, is verses 22 through 23. So look at those different traits that should be seen in us every day when we are being led by the Spirit. I try to help us to understand that these were not traits that we can sometimes look at and go, well, it's all right that I don't have this one down just as long as I've got these other ones down. I believe that they're all interlinked together. And the more I actually began preparing today's lesson, the more I came to the realization that I'm going to start repeating myself a lot. And the reason for that is that you can't have some of these traits unless you already have the other traits. They are forever linked together by the gospel and by how the Spirit works in us every day. So I want us to be mindful of that. When you do hear me repeating some things, it's not because I didn't feel like trying to rewrite a lesson. It's because these are interlinked concepts and interlinked ideas. In order for us to grow and to be the type of people that God desires us to be that type of people that can honestly say that we are looking forward to the return of Jesus, this is the type of man, this is the type of woman that you are supposed to be. You are to be loving and joyful and patient and kind. And if you aren't these things, there are some drastic changes that need to be made in your life. One of the things that we find, and then this is going to be, just to let you know, more of a lesson for me perhaps than for someone else, is that patience is of utmost importance in order to have these other traits. These other traits are of utmost importance to have patience. I believe our society misunderstands what patience is all about. And I think that's what leads us to coming up short to having the godly patience as revealed in the scriptures. When you think about patience, there are a lot of people in our world today that see patience in a very worldly mindset because it is something that is only temporary or only temporarily necessary in a given circumstance. I'll give you an illustration. Let's say that you have a neighbor that is doing something that really bothers you. Like maybe they're letting his or her dog use your yard for waste. And it bothers you seeing them do this over and over again. Or maybe this time of the year, they're blowing all their leaves into your yard. And you like your yard to look very kept. And it bothers you that when they're taking care of their yard, rather than bagging it up, they just blow it into your yard. And you put up with it for a week, and then you say something to them, you're calm about it, you just say, look, it bothers me when you're doing this. If you're going to be cleaning up your yard from leaves, I'd prefer you not just put it in my yard because I don't do that to you when I clean up my leaves. So let's be kind to one another here. And the person apologized to you, and they don't do it anymore. And then we talk about how patient we were in that given circumstance for a whole week. And we think that's what patience is. Or we think that patience is waiting in a traffic stop for that extra 30 minutes and you're worried you're going to be late to work because of an accident down the road. And rather than having road rage, you just calmly sit there and you deal with it for 30 minutes. And we say, how patient was I? That's not patience as revealed in the scriptures. I'm not saying we shouldn't be patient in those situations. But I believe if we have the patience as revealed in the scriptures, those particular situations will seem like minor issues when really talking about what it means to be patient. Patience, when seen by the God, would be this circumstance. You have the same neighbor, and yet no matter how many times you ask that person to stop doing it, that neighbor refuses to do so. In fact, it almost appears that he gets sheer joy out of watching you be miserable and cleaning up his dog's messes every day. Or after going out there, not only cleaning up your leaves, which you already finished, but Now you're going back over there cleaning up his leaves. And then to top it off, he also feels the necessity to tell all the other neighbors around you how horrible a person you are and getting the neighborhood to turn against you. Seems like he's constantly, or she is constantly going out of their way to make your life exceptionally difficult. How do you respond to that situation? A person walking by the Spirit is not going to have an outburst of wrath. There will be no actions or thoughts of vengeance. There will be no backbiting, no gossip, no rumor spreading, nor slander. Because a patient person bears it all. When it never gets better and it never changes, can you still be patient? Because that's the patience that when we're walking by the Spirit that we ultimately have. So I thought what I would do for you today is talk to you about some things, maybe not keys, but maybe signs to help you know whether or not you're growing the way that you should. If you talk to my family, they'd probably tell you that I'm the last person that has this figured out. I'm maybe the last person that should be giving this advice. While I'm not having fits of road rage around every corner, I do find it difficult to have patience in all things. So I want you to know that this lesson truly does preach to me more often than it's me preaching to you. And I felt it was helpful for me. I'm hoping it's helpful for you. The first sign you're walking in the right direction is that you found a way to swallow your pride. Oftentimes, our patience runs thin because we feel like we are being attacked. And when we start feeling like we're being attacked, we almost always go on the defensive. We feel the need to defend ourselves against the onslaught of other individuals or other circumstances that are coming our way. And yes, sometimes we actually might be under attack. I'm going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But for now, I want us to understand that what I'm talking about is when you feel like you're being attacked. Usually, this is happening and we're taking things way too personally. Examples we might find this holding true is dealing with rush hour traffic on a daily basis. We might feel like everything's out against us and trying to get to work on time. But is it really the people in front of you or the stoplights purposely hitting red every time you come up to it? Is that really what's going on? No, the stop, I have often felt that way. Like I hit every stoplight on the way to work. Like, how is this possible that every single one of them I'm hitting? But is it really some magical force sitting up there with the button to hit? There's Wes. Red light. And we're going to get on the next one too. I know some of you are sitting there smiling. It's kind of silly you would think that. I know. But you know, when we're in that moment, or is that the way that we're often feeling? Or do we feel like every person that's in front of us is always driving purposely slower to make our life more difficult? We're having that issue because we're not swallowing our pride. We feel that way with dealing with those who always seem to be angry toward others. We have a person in your life, maybe someone you work with, someone you live near, maybe someone in your family that doesn't get along with anybody. But when they are specifically not getting along with you in that given moment, you take it personally. When the issue really isn't about what you may have said or done, it's about that person isn't living the life that they should be living. Or maybe you're dealing with a coworker or someone you know that badmouths all Christians. Not just you specifically, but they badmouth anyone who would put their faith in a God. Or maybe the spouse that comes home from work always in a bad mood. They come home, and I'm not saying that they should be coming home in a bad mood, taking it out on you. Talk about that side of things here in just a little bit. But when you're the one receiving the frustration that they had in dealing with things at work, and they're unloading on you, and you start taking it personally. It's not you that they're upset with, You know that when you're listening to the words coming out of their mouth, but for whatever reason, you begin feeling like they're attacking you and how they're sharing how their day went. Because dinner wasn't ready on time. Or because the child's toy was sitting in the middle of the doorway and you stepped on it and you walked in the door. And we start taking things personally. We have to remember that not everything is about us. And I realize this is really got me thinking about this concept of patience. I was actually watching a sitcom the other day, and just something that was said in it really struck home to me. And there was a character A, I'm going to talk about the person's name, but character A was having a really bad day. Like nothing was going right. Something he had been working on for a while began falling apart. And he was really frustrated and discouraged, and his roommate, character B, wanted to find a way to help, so he thought it would be a good idea to call his own mother, because she was a psychiatrist. Like, well, what do I need to do to help get him out of this funk? And she initially told her own son, I don't have time to help you right now. And he said, well, it's not for me, it's for my roommate. And she goes, oh, I'm all ears, how can I help? Where her son gets frustrated. And she says, not everything's about you. But let me help. She gives advice. And so he's providing this advice to his roommate, character A, and character A tosses it off as irrelevant. That's not going to work. And character B goes, well, my mom thought it was a good idea. And he goes, oh, well, if your mom said so, we should try this. And he gets frustrated. Character B does, well, when I said it was the idea, you didn't like it. Why all of a sudden it's a good idea? And he goes, no. And his character A goes, well, not everything's about you. Not everything is about you. We are not the center of the universe. And truth be told, we need to stop being the center of our own universe. When we have patience issues, it's often because that's what we're doing. We're making ourselves the center of the universe, the center of our own universe, and we're getting frustrated that nobody else is doing that. And we end up taking it out on them. We have the outbursts of wrath, and we show anger, and we get vindictive because we're making it about us. But it's not about me. To give you an even better example, and one that's much more severe, I'll give you a biblical example. Think about the relationship between King Saul and David. Do you remember when they first met? Most of our children may not realize it was the first time they met, but the first time they actually met was when David killed Goliath. That story is the first time they met, and Saul had no problems with David at that point. Why wouldn't he like David? David was a champion. He trying to talk about it doing it, but David was willing to go, and even Saul tried to give David his own armor. You don't do that to a person you hate. You do it to a person that you want to help. Of course, we know David doesn't wear it. He goes out and he finds victory. Then we find out that David is actually one of the ones performing music for King Saul, which is a wonderful thing to do. He comes in, he plays music, and then one time, after Saul has ruined his relationship with God, David is sitting there, he's singing his songs, he's perhaps playing like a psaltery, and Saul finds the necessity to pick up a spear and chuck it at David. Not just because he felt like throwing something in general, he tried to pin David to the wall. He tried to kill David. For what purpose? Because David was singing this song? You want to take a guess what kind of song he was singing? Because I've got a lot of them, and so do you in your Bible. We read one of them earlier, which I think was actually written probably shortly after He tried to get pinned to the wall by King Saul. David probably was singing songs about what it's like to have a trusting and loving relationship with God, to a person who knew full well he no longer had that relationship because the scriptures tell us that the Spirit of God had left him. God left him because he chose to do things his own way. Their relationship was broken not because of things that David did to hurt it. All David did throughout their time together was the right thing. David didn't raise up armies to fight against Saul. He had an army to help defend him against Saul, to help him run when Saul was coming after him. But those that fought by David's side did not fight against King Saul. They fought against the enemies of King Saul. David had such appreciation for the man. Do you realize that when King Saul died, the man that came and reported that he put to death King Saul, do you know what happened to him? David had him put to death. You know why? Because no one lifts their hand against the Lord's anointed. No matter how bad he was, no matter how much he hunted David across the countryside, David refused to hurt him. David had opportunities. He refused to do so. That's patience. I don't read through any of the accounts of their relationship of David despising Saul for all the things that Saul did. And I'm going to be honest with you, as just a red-blooded American, I would argue he had every right to. Could you imagine your boss literally picking up something and throwing it at you to kill you for doing something that he asked you to do? And that no matter how much you try to support and to help your boss, all it did was make him literally try to kill you. Would you continue to go to work for this person? Or else, no. David did. David did. And he refused to allow anyone else to bring harm to Saul without consequence. That is patience. He didn't get even. He let God handle it. That's what we should be doing. To not let our patience run thin because we focus too much on ourselves and how everything in the world might make us feel. I know that is a popular sentiment in our society, but I think patience is not a word I would use to describe a lot of people in the world today. And maybe that's the problem, is that we get all upset about everything. We feel that the right way to respond is to always be angry because of how it made me feel in a given situation. We ought to be more understanding. We ought to be a people that realizes that we are not the center of the universe. Second sign we could be looking at is whether or not we're taking the time to slow down. I know that we live in a society that believes that everything needs to be done in an instant. Those of you with children or grandchildren, could you imagine what our grandchildren and children would do today if they had to wait for dial-up internet? Imagine how you would feel if you had to wait for dial-up internet again, right? That page took 5 seconds to load. What is going on? You used to be able to log in the internet, go cook your dinner, and come back. Okay, we're logged in now. Crazy? You actually used something like that? Yeah, we did. We were a little bit more patient then, I suppose. people complain that the fast food line isn't moving fast enough. Even the microwave oven is used to cut the cooking time of things. Because 5 minutes is too long, so we should be able to nuke it in 30 seconds. That's actually less than 30 seconds, I think, for a hot dog. You can boil it for 5 minutes, I think you can nuke it for 10 seconds. Because 5 minutes is just way too much time to spend doing something. Pop-Tart, you can throw it in the toaster or nuke it for 3 seconds. That's how busy we are. That we're going to have microwave instructions on Pop-Tarts. 3 seconds to the microwave and you're good to go. Because the toaster took too long. That's the society we live in. I struggle with this idea of slowing down. I suppose I've always had issues with it, and I didn't realize it when I was younger. And it wasn't until I got older I began to understand what was going on. My grandfathers took me fishing all the time. I thought my grandfathers only knew how to catfish, because that's the only thing they ever took to go do. And catfishing is not like other type of fishing. I found out that my mom's dad, his favorite type of fishing was bass fishing. He went bass fishing all the time. I'm like, my mom was telling me about this. I was like, what? When? I never went bass fishing with him. Oh, he went like every week. It's like, I went fishing with him every week, and we were never out bass fishing. All we ever did was catfish. And then my dad was telling me about his dad, and he loved to fly fish. And he went fly fishing every week. And I'm still thinking, what do you mean? I went fishing with him like every week. I went fishing like twice a week when I was younger. And all they ever did was take me catfishing. That's it. And then I began realizing as I got older, why? Because when you're bass fishing, you're constantly moving from spot to spot. And when you're fly fishing, well, you might stand in the same spot. You're throwing it out and you're bringing it back in. You're throwing it out and you're going to bring it back in. But when you're catfishing, you throw it out there and you sit on a bucket and you just wait. And you wait. As a kid, it drove me crazy. Why can't I? Because you're going to disturb the fish. Just be patient. You'll find it. I eventually learned to love catfishing. And now I understand why my grandfathers took me out there all the time. Because I couldn't wait for anything. Every time I would try to learn something new, I felt that I had to be great at it right away. That's like a ridiculous idea. I understand that. You look at the professional athletes, none of them were perfect from day one. Tom Brady was not born throwing a ball perfectly, and his parents didn't think that when he was 1 year old walking around the living room, he's going to win multiple Super Bowls, be arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. If you watched him play in college, you didn't think that either. But he did. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. Sometimes we have to take the time to slow down. And in Luke in chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, we find the story of Mary and Martha. More Mary more so than Martha. They were having Jesus over for a meal. And Martha was sitting at the feet of Jesus while Mary was trying to get the meal ready. And eventually she looks to Jesus and she asks, aren't you going to say anything? Like, I'm running around here trying to get this meal prepared for you and everyone else that you brought. Keep in mind, it probably wasn't just Jesus, but all the disciples too. So you think about a small Thanksgiving-sized meal. Here's what we're talking about. And I'm doing this all by myself, and Martha and I, we agreed to do this together. Why aren't you saying something? Tell her to get up. We got work to do. What did Jesus say to her? She's chosen the better part. Mary was so busy and so hurried and so rushed that she was missing what was most important. She was missing the fact that her sister was doing what was most important. To sit at the feet of Jesus and learn. Now think about it like this. She knew Jesus, and she knew the benefit of what it would be like to sit at the feet of Jesus. And if she could get too busy with life and become impatient with her sister as a result of it, what does that say about you and I and our opportunities? I can tell you it's going to happen to us too. We've got to take time to slow down and remember not only what's most important, but because the world doesn't revolve around me, sometimes I need to slow down and think about why somebody else did something that they were doing, or why somebody else felt the way that they did. Because they might have said what they did in that moment because of something that had absolutely nothing to do with me. Because I couldn't take the time to slow down, I just got frustrated in the situation. So take the time to slow down. Sign number 3, that you are learning to walk as a spirit and being patient, is seen in how you love. When I first put this lesson together, this was the only part of the lesson I wanted to talk about. Because I think that it might be perhaps the most important part. We need to really learn how to love others in a way that moves us to be patient. And to help you understand that, I'm going to remind you of the love that you have for those who have this love already. You'll understand what I'm talking about. Your children and your grandchildren. We love them, and that love moves us to have patience with them in ways that perhaps we don't have patience with anybody else. How many of us will be patient with a person that constantly wakes you up in the middle of the night screaming? How many of us would have patience with a person who, no matter how many times you tell them, don't touch the stove, don't do that, they don't learn the lesson until they actually do it? We are patient with children when they do things like that. When they touch hot stoves after we've told them 1,000 times not to. We've told them to stop coloring on the walls, and they've done it over and over and over. We're patient with our children, even though they continue to bring home animals from every single ditch they seem to be crawling into. And I'm not saying my children have necessarily done any of these things, so don't go asking too many questions to them. But we are patient with them when they fight with each other, when they fail to potty train, when they refuse to stay in bed, when they're teething. We are patient with them. Why? Because we love them. That's why. I know of a couple who was a newlywed at the time. They had a baby within a couple of months of them being married. They were not faithful to God at the time. The baby had what seemed to be night terrors, and every single night, the child got up screaming and could not be comforted back to sleep. Be 45 minutes to an hour of just nonstop screaming. Hours would be taken just to get them to the point where they could get back to sleep. And this went on till the child was 4 years old. Every single night, this is what happened. 4 years means over 1,000 nights without a break. Over 1,000 nights without a full night's rest. Over 1,000 nights without a crying child. Literally every night this took place. When you're not sleeping, it makes patience really hard. Because when we're not sleeping, we get grumpy. Because we're not getting the rest that we need to be the best versions of ourselves. That couple never yelled at their child for not sleeping. They yelled at each other. They yelled at people at work. Sometimes they yelled at me. But they never yelled at the child. You know why? Because it was their kid. And they absolutely loved that child. Love moves us to treat our children with a patience unmatched toward others. We overlook, we excuse, we forgive. And yes, I understand that this can be done to unhealthy levels. You have a 20-year-old that ends up in jail and you pretend like nothing happened. We have some unhealthy levels of patience perhaps going on how we handle those particular situations. But patience is there, and it's generated by genuine love. If we can learn to love others that way, you realize how easy it is to be patient? Do you know why we don't love people that way? Because we're not walking in the Spirit. Because that's what agape love is. Agape love is the willingness to sacrifice everything for the good of somebody else. What do you think you're doing as a parent? You sacrifice everything for the good of your child. You give up the sleepless nights. You give up having new shoes. You give up having the nicer things. You give up everything to make sure that they have everything that they need. That you'll go hungry long before they ever go hungry. Because that's what agape love is. And when we love that way, we are patient enough with them to know that we have to forgive, we have to wait, we have to overlook, we have to excuse particular things that are taking place. We certainly aren't using it as an opportunity to find a way to attack and garner vengeance against a person. And you know why we love this way? Not just because we're walking by the Spirit in relationship with our children, but because our Father in heaven taught us to love that way. I believe it's how God has made us. After all, we're made in His image, aren't we? And God is love. I have a former coworker of mine. I remember when he was getting ready to have his kid, all he could talk about was how scared he was of not loving the child. And then the child was born, and all I could hear him talk about is how much he loves the kid. That quick. The day before that child was born, I remember talking to him because the mother was being induced. He was terrified about what it was going to mean for him. And the baby's born, and all I could think about is being a dad. So how patient then is God? We see in the script that we see in the scriptures. How patient was God with Israel? How patient was Jesus with his disciples when they constantly would argue about which one of them was greatest in the kingdom of heaven? How patient was God with the ancient world in Genesis in chapter 6 when the only thought on their heart was only evil continually? We can make an argument that God would have been justified to send the waters that moment if they only thought evil continually. But God was patient enough to allow one man and his family to build an ark and save and be saved. And how patient is God with us? Think about the gods of mythology. This is why I get so frustrated when people try to talk about Jehovah as being compared to some spaghetti god or being compared to the gods of the Babylonians or the gods of the Romans. But you not understand the difference? The gods of the Romans and the Babylonians were looking for reasons to not hurt me. I shouldn't do it because of this. They were always punishing man. Zeus was up with a lightning bolt ready to strike down someone because he just felt like it. The God of the Bible has every reason to strike me down dead as I speak to you now. He is patient beyond measure with every mistake, every sin that I have ever committed. He's patient because he loves me and he loves you. And it's what we need to be patient with each other. And then lastly, the last sign that we are walking in the Spirit when it comes to patience is that we are trusting in God. When everything feels like it's going wrong in your life, we still must have patience. And I can think of no better example to give you, actually, than that of Joseph. I know a lot of times we think, well, patience, we should talk about Job. What happened to Job was in a matter of days. What happened to Joseph was over 13 years. What happened to Job was crazy circumstances. Just insane circumstances that made him feel like everything was falling apart around him. Just one right after the other, even to the point of the death of all of his children, and then he got sick. Joseph, on the other hand, was hated by his brothers, for the most part, of no fault of his own. Sure, you might make the argument that they may not have liked him because they could have viewed him as a tattletale, as he would go back and report to Dad what was going on, and I know that I didn't like it when my siblings did that to me, because I usually got in a lot more trouble than what they would have gotten into for the same thing. But I understand maybe they can look at it in that sense. But to be frustrated, but to be moved to the point of hatred, and so much hatred that what they thought was the right thing to do in the moment was to kill him. Tossing him in the pit was not about initially selling him off into slavery. It was about killing him. Of course, Reuben was hoping to sneak him out and take him back to Dad to earn favor with Dad. But the rest of them, including the great Judah, thought it was a good idea initially to kill him. Eventually, come to senses, let's not kill the boy. Let's just sell him and tell Dad we killed him. So he doesn't ever bother going to go looking for him. So at 17 years old, he is sold into slavery because Dad loved him more and gave him a coat of many colors. And he does his best in the circumstance. And what does he get in thanks for it? He gets a master whose wife won't leave him alone and consistently and constantly pressures him into committing adultery with her. Things get so bad that he refused to be in the house or in any location by himself because he didn't want to be ever found alone with her. Because he knows what was coming. And when it finally did happen, and she again proposed the idea, he said that I could not do this sin against my God, and he ran away so fast and so hard that when she grabbed his coat, he left it behind. And she took that coat, she laid it at her husband's feet and said, "Your servant tried to rape me, and this is proof." And so he's thrown into jail for it. Did he do anything wrong yet? Because I can't find anything deserving of it. And then in jail, he does his best to be a good prisoner, which I don't know how this is possible, but he does his best to be the best prisoner that he could be, and he actually gets an opportunity to be given some responsibility. And then God blesses him with a gift of interpreting dreams. And he gets the opportunity to be before the baker and wine taster, drinker for the king, the cupbearer for the king, for the Pharaoh. And he interprets their dreams. And he simply asks that they remember him. And then he's forgotten for 2 more years. Of course, I don't blame the baker too much. He didn't make it. But the cupbearer, he had every opportunity because he was there by the Pharaoh's side every single meal. And I don't know how many he had, but if he was eating 3 meals a day, that's 3 meals a day. Because the cupbearer didn't just hold the cup, he tasted the cup before he gave it to the Pharaoh. He was the most trusted man the Pharaoh had to have. Because the easiest way to poison the Pharaoh, they believed, was putting it in his drink. So you wanted someone you could trust. The food, the drink was not poison. You don't think he didn't have the Pharaoh's ear? I know he did, because when the Pharaoh started having bad dreams, and a dream that kept him up all night, he goes, "Oh yeah, by the way, I know somebody." And David doesn't say, no. You had your chance. I'm not going to go talk to the Pharaoh. No, he doesn't do that at all. He doesn't say, "I can't do it." What he says in Genesis 41:16 is that God is going to do it. It's not really me doing this. God is going to tell you the answer to your dream. God will let the Pharaoh know the answer he desires. And eventually we know as the story goes, Joseph becomes second in all of Pharaoh's kingdom. In chapter 41, beginning in verse 51, his children are born. He named his firstborn Manasseh. I said, "It's because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." And the second he named Ephraim. And said, "It's because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." He didn't blame God for everything that just happened over the last 13 years. In fact, when standing before his sons, before his brothers, after his father Jacob, Israel, had died, and they were concerned that he was going to get vengeance on them, he said to them, "You did mean it for evil against me." Yeah, that's exactly where your heart was. But God meant it for good. For 13 years, all he knew was suffering. And every time something seemed to get better, it got worse. Yet he was patient. We see nothing throughout his story that made you think that he was giving up. He was not blaming someone. He just kept his faith and he moved forward with what he could control. So when life starts kicking you while you're down, look to Joseph and think about how he overcame. His trust in God was not based on all the good things that God was doing for him. Think about that for just a moment. It wasn't because of all the times that he sat there in that prison cell and said, "God, I need you to hear me." It wasn't because God delivered him from his brothers in the way that he was probably hoping. And I can't imagine how many nights he went to bed as a young man saying, "God, Please bring my dad soon. Certainly he's going to be looking for me. God didn't do anything for 13 years. He loved God because God is. He trusted God because God is. And that was enough for him. And ultimately it should be enough for you and I. When we have godly patience, it is made possible because love unconditionally, not just those whom we know really well and do good things for us. We love unconditionally everybody, including our enemies. It's because we take the time to slow down, maybe realize the bigger picture. It's made possible because we choose to trust in God. And I encourage you to do that yourself. I encourage you to pray that I become more trusting in my God, because he's the one ultimately in control. And while we may not always see what's going on, we should know, because we're just reminded of it. We just took a meal to remind us of it. Jesus is coming again. Yes. We can patiently wait, knowing that whatever wrongs that we have faced in life, or frustrations that we may have to undertake, that if we remain faithful, everything will be worth it.